Jackie Boyle, welcome to the show.
Tim, I've been waiting for this for probably my whole life.
Well, I am excited. Our listeners may not know that you and I have known each other for a long time now, dating back to when I was on faculty at NeoMed. And for those that are outside of Ohio, that's Northeast Ohio Medical University up in Akron, Cleveland. Jackie was a student, then a resident, and we were colleagues for several years at NeoMed, where you still reside as a faculty member and an administrator. So yes, this has been a while in the making, and I am so excited for this conversation. And as you and I were talking about on the show before we hit record, I had to remind myself this is a personal finance podcast because we're going to take several different directions that they're related, but unrelated in some degree. But I think that's okay. It's going to be exciting conversation. And I had the chance to have you and Paul, your husband Paul, on episode 331. We'll link to that in the show notes, where you guys shared your journey of paying off $208,000 of student loan debt, which is an incredible accomplishment. And on that show, you shared how you did it, why you did it, the highs, the lows, the compromises you had to make, and how you were able to work together to really sustain the momentum of that payoff journey. So I'm excited to build on that conversation. But for those that didn't catch that show, give us the update. That was nearly 2 years ago. So bring us up to speed where you're at today and how that milestone of becoming debt-free was significant to your financial journey, to your family.
Oh, wow. I can't believe that was already 2 years ago. I mean, it feels like yesterday where we hit the button. I'll never forget that moment of hitting submit on the last payment. And the feeling that came along with it was just freedom, relief, satisfaction from being able to achieve that goal. And since then, it's been really great because now we have freed up income that we could put towards new financial goals. I was so hyper-focused on getting the student loan paid off that literally like every dollar that we had extra always went to that goal. So one, we started creating newer, smaller goals that were, things we had been putting off for a while with either the house or vacation planning, or looking at and learning more about the other areas of our financial plan that we've been neglecting forever, like investment. I know, and I still feel like I'm a very beginner at investing, but with the help of your team, really learning about, okay, now we have some flexibility to start putting those finances towards the really long run, and didn't have that constant overwhelming pressure of like, paying off the loan. So, it's been great. Now really focusing on, again, investing, but also, deciding where those incomes flow to and having new goals and also thinking about like managing the mortgage and things. So, it's an awesome feeling. You will all get there if you still have student loans that you're working on. And with someone like YFP in your corner, I mean, you can't lose. So, highly, highly recommend.
I love that, Jackie. One of the things I love about our community is we have people all the way from, those that are getting ready to retire that are looking back, have a lot of great advice to apply and to give to others. And those are just getting started that are maybe looking at a $200,000 student loan balance, similar to what you and Paul worked through, and are like, oh my goodness, this is the gorilla in the room. And it's hard to see past that, right? And for some, it can be a 5, 10, 15-year journey. And it's a milestone. It's an important one, but it's not the end all be all. And I think your journey highlights that so well, that you guys worked through that. And it's helped kind of clarify the next steps and the path forward. But you're on to bigger, better, and exciting things as well. So as I often say, the financial plan never ends. It
No.
never ends. And we always have an opportunity to learn and grow in this journey.
In case you're wondering, like, was this smooth? Absolutely not. I made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of them were before I started learning more about finance. So if you're out there and you feel like it's overwhelming, but you're not sure where to start, just really start getting engaged with the community, because you will learn quickly. You will hopefully avoid the things that could have sped up the journey for us. We had an 11-year journey, but being engaged, asking questions, realizing people have done this before you, and don't let it paralyze you. The amount is big, but you could take it in really small chunks.
Yeah, I love that encouragement. I often say that pharmacists have a doctorate level pharmacy education, but may have a kindergarten level education in personal finance. And there's no judgment in that. That's just the reality of where many of us are at, and we have a lot to learn. And that's the whole purpose of financial literacy, financial wellness. Let's talk about your career journey before we get into the fun stuff. Talk our listeners through your career journey, how you got to the work that you're doing now, both on the academic side as well as what we'll talk about later in your work with Jackie Boyle Coaching.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And I think I always reflect back to a mid-year meeting that I went to about 10 years ago where I was trying to figure out what is the stepwise path of success in pharmacy. And I always had an inkling of things that excited me and discovered during residency where I really wanted to be in the patient care world, in the more relationship building, ambulatory care space. I knew I loved teaching. I'm like, isn't there some checklist that I should be following to make sure that I'm doing all the right things, I'm taking all the right opportunities. And I realized in that session, they had a bunch of individuals who were at all different stages of their career path. And I paid most attention to the ones who were at the end. I'm like, oh, they've got it. They've got all the keys to success figured out. Of course, I had amazing mentors like yourself, Tim, to ask questions to. Well, with those third parties, I'm like, maybe they know something that I can glean. And all of them said the exact same thing, that they could have never predicted their career path if they tried.
Mhm.
And I have found that to be so true. I think that every opportunity that has come up has either been one that has been created by, proposing new ideas for positions or working with others to figure out how to make a new opportunity work, or, following those things that really excite you and listening to what your mentors are giving to you as feedback. There were a few times in my career where an opportunity looked great on paper, and I had one of my mentors say that will ruin your career. And it's sometimes in those moments where you're like, "Wow, that was rough," to hear. But I was really thankful because it would have put me on a totally different trajectory. Ultimately, wasn't really aligned with who I was or what I thought was important. And having those questions asked about, like, why are you doing what you're doing? And is it for you or is it for meeting some external expectation? So far in my journey, I have been primarily focused at the beginning in the mix of patient care. So in that ambulatory care world, what I really loved was developing relationships with patients. I could talk to them about their dogs, their vacations, their grandchildren, like whatever it was going on in their life, to me was equally as important as providing medication management for them. I loved growing and developing others. I discovered that early in my pharmacy school process, so teaching was a must for me. And then as I evolved and grew, I realized in my practice-based faculty position, and I got feedback from my practice site manager that I was always staying late to continue teaching. It's like, you're staying till like 6 p.m., with these learners, and it may be time to head home. But I loved it. I kept finding myself in that space of wanting to be more and more on the educational and development side. And honestly, when the position opened up full time at the college, I kind of disqualified myself from the opportunity. I thought, oh gosh, this is a little bit early in a career to be thinking about an opportunity like this with a full time administrative role in a leadership position. I hadn't had any formal leadership positions, although I had been a volunteer in professional associations in a leadership capacity and learned a ton from that. But with the encouragement of mentors like you again, Tim, who said, put your name in the hat. The way to find out if you get the opportunity is you can't not be in it. You will always get a no if you don't raise your hand and say,
Mhm.
hey, I've got skills, I have potential, I have qualifications that may not fit the traditional sense. And somehow everything ended up working out. Now I've been at the college for about 6 years in an administrative and faculty capacity. I oversee our student affairs team. I oversee our workforce development area and interacting with our alumni and really supporting them. But really, it aligns well with coaching and all the professional development things that I slowly started discovering were my zone of genius. And so it has been quite the evolution. And without the encouragement of mentors and coaches myself, like I have a coach right now, I think I always will, but without people in your world to ask you some really, really hard questions about what you want, I don't know that I would have ever discovered and really taken the right opportunities for not only my professional life, but importantly, my personal life as well.
Yeah, it's really cool, Jackie, as I hear you reflect on that journey. You can see the thread, see the through line of the experiences that you've had that have led you to this moment, and the work that you're doing at the university and your coaching work. There's obviously synergies and connections. But so often, as you mentioned to that mid-year meeting and talking with pharmacists that are more seasoned in their career and getting their advice, so often we only realize that in hindsight. And when you share that wisdom that other pharmacists, of which I feel the same way of, hey, I could have never expected the path to turn at this moment in this way, right? And again, in hindsight, we can often see that, but it's hard on the front end to really believe that, to trust it, and to be open to that can be very unsettling. I think especially for, and again, no judgment, I'll put myself in this bucket, that type A, overachiever mindset, like it can feel like a very linear path. The pressure can feel like a very linear path. And I think the real beauty, I've often given the example that we should think about our careers more like climbing a rock wall and less like climbing a ladder. Climbing a ladder has pressure. You either go up or you go down. And at some point, you get to the end of the ladder, right? If you're climbing a rock wall, especially if you're out in nature, you can go any which way you can go. And it's not defined by the title, the position, the salary. It's defined by the experiences, the skills, the interests. And when you start to stack those things, it's a really beautiful experience, but it can be scary as heck, especially for someone such as yourself that maybe goes a more traditional, hey, I got my PharmD, I did a PGI-1, I did a PGI-2, I got board certification. All of a sudden we find ourselves in this identity of like, okay, because of that, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Who says? Like, who says you need to do X, Y, and Z? And I think our profession, in my opinion, desperately needs people that can start to break outside of that box and start climbing the rock wall and get off the ladder, if you will.
Yeah, I love that analogy, Tim. I think it's such a beautiful metaphor. And I think the pulls that you feel from your intuition can feel very scary and uncomfortable, but they're often in the direction of that next step on the rock wall. And if you just trust yourself that, again, the floor, as you've reminded me over time, is like not bad, right? Like you can get a pharmacist role in various areas of our profession. And if that's the worst case scenario, like your rock wall is really built on a super solid foundation.
Mm-hmm.
If you give yourself permission to trust those interests and really find where you're daydreaming, and you're thinking about things. If you ever have downtime at work, I often ask that question of my clients, like, you might not have downtime at work. I really want to acknowledge that. You may be in a role where that's just not a scenario for you. But if that's the case, like if you did have downtime at work, what would you work on? Because I know if there was a downtime at my work, or maybe at the end of the day when I finally had time to decompress, I found myself working on the things that I was really excited about. And so if we just start paying attention more to ourselves and what our little inner voice is telling us, and following that and trusting that you will learn, you will fail, you'll grow along the way, then you'll find those areas of your walk wall that's like, oh, didn't know that this little thing was over here I can grab onto and, make a new path for myself.
Yeah, I've heard these referred to before as pings to your soul.
Oh, yeah.
Like pings to your soul. And I love that. And the work is, do we have the space? Do we have the breathing room? Can we hear these? Can we pay attention to these? And as you mentioned, a lot of pharmacists are in environment settings where that may not be realistic, but how can you create that space? Whether it's journaling or getting out in nature, other types of things where you can start to be aware of some of these pieces that are coming up for you. All right, Jackie, I want to talk about imposter syndrome. And I gave you a heads up before we hit interview to say, hey, we may or may not be on the same page about this, and that's okay. Like, I think it'll make for a really good conversation. But, I want to get your perspective on how you see this present itself in the pharmacists that you've coached, the students that you've worked with, the residents that you've mentored, and perhaps reframe this concept for some of our listeners. And I want to first give a definition to make sure we're on the same page of this. And I pulled this from Stanford University, and they say, quote, imposter phenomenon, more commonly referred to as imposter syndrome, was first coined by psychologists in the 1970s to describe the internal experience of doubting your abilities. Some have described it as the constant fear of being exposed as a fraud, which can present itself through questions such as, why is everybody smarter, more accomplished, more put together, more advanced than me? When will they realize I'm not as competent as them? Do I belong here? Why should I be here? And so on, right? And we'll link to that in the show notes if anyone wants to look at that further. Now, here's my 2 cents on the imposter syndrome, and I want to get your take on this. I think this is very real, okay? So before my listeners just hit close on this episode, I think this is real, but I think this term is way, way, way overused. And in fact, like, just to get it off my chest, like, I'm sick of hearing about it. Like, I don't like this term. Now, here's why. I think it can become a place where we can camp out in the safe place rather than really doing the work. I think it can be the place where we actually sit to prevent the important transformation, the important work that needs to be done. Stephen Pressfield talks about this in his book, Turning Pro, of going from an amateur to a pro. Like, these are the hard things we have to face. And especially for those that are early in their career, a doubting of your abilities, it's a natural feeling to be expected. We don't have experience, right? So I think it's a reality without having much learned experience. That said, again, I've seen it. I have felt it. I know it can be real. I've worked through it to some degree. So I'm wondering, like, is it less about the feelings, but more about where this can be a concern is when it's a persistent nature, meaning that this keeps coming up despite the experiences, despite the learned moments that we have, that these feelings keep coming up and on some level kind of haunt us. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics, as you know. And I know we were talking a little bit before we started about my thoughts around this topic have continued to evolve over time as I've dug in and explored more, not only in the science, but the lived experience of folks that I've interacted with throughout our work. And I think that, our profession sometimes does it to ourselves. We have the ability to say, okay, the pharmacy profession is very much rule following, checklist driven, sometimes perfectionistic tendencies. And so to achieve these kind of unattainable perfection outcomes, I think we could externally hold ourselves to a bar or internally hold ourselves to a bar that just isn't realistic. And so we can set these expectations in our minds of what we need to be or what we should be doing or what path we should take. And then we stay stuck in this analysis paralysis and therefore don't end up doing anything out of fear of failing or fear of being found out. I think that can manifest as stagnation or being stuck forever. When folks start to work with others or, have a coach or a mentor who can hold up a mirror to them to say, okay, are these things you're telling yourself true? I think that process of just self-discovery of, okay, what is it that I am telling myself? Is that narrative, one, helpful in getting me towards my goals? And is it accurate? Can be a very interesting exercise to work through to see what of these experiences can be immediately mitigated. What of them are perhaps things that are being influenced by our external environment that maybe are out of our control or are just out there signaling to us that we don't belong somewhere. And I think taking that inventory can be a really great first step with the expectation that you have to vocalize these things to someone else. I think we can stay stuck swirling in our head forever and ever, or count ourselves out from opportunities, or not raise our hand when we should be by just staying in this hamster wheel of, okay, I can't do this because I'm not deserving, or I can't do this because I don't have X, Y, and Z certification, or I can't ever do this because I don't have this amount of experience yet. And you put yourself in this hamster wheel catch-22 of just not doing anything, and so I think there's a lot that impacts these feelings, But if you stay inside your own head with it forever, you might not be able to make progress towards changing that self-perception or self-efficacy and realizing that you have potential that hasn't been, put out into the world yet. So interested to hear, what your thoughts are on that, Tim, but I've definitely been evolving on this topic for some time, and I find it so fascinating that it really truly impacts folks at all stages of one's career across all
Hmm.
health professions. It's really something that fascinates me, that why is it that we have this prevailing feeling all the time, and how can we help each other through working through that and minimizing those feelings? Because the other negative side of it is that high imposter feelings lead to less job satisfaction, higher burnout, higher levels of stress, and those things are going to be detrimental immediately to someone's career growth, to someone's well-being. And so that part of it as well really interests me, because if we can decrease those imposter feelings, we also have better overall, personal well-being and professional fulfillment too.
Yeah, really good perspective. And I think my frame of reference was coming from largely an internal perspective of doing the work
Mhm.
internally, because I think one of the things I've seen is, it can, sometimes we don't want to admit it, but it can be a safe place to be stuck. And that's a hard thing to hear, but it can be very true. And so I think as you add it onto the conversation of this, it's not just an internal, but there's an external component, really important. And sometimes there's things in that external environment that are not within our control. And how do we acknowledge the reality of that, but also not abdicate ourselves from taking responsibility of the things that we can take responsibility for internally, right? So there's two sides of this I think are really powerful. The second thing you said that really struck me is the value and power of a mentor or a coach in this environment, right? Somebody, we're often too close to ourselves, period. So is there someone else that can really help us put the mirror up and help us see some things that more objectively that maybe we're not seeing or we're over glorifying? And like, again, this isn't a journey that ends, but there may be some real truth in the things that we're feeling and an opportunity to work on some things. And how can a mentor, encourage us to call out, the things that need to be called out? Hey, this isn't real. You have this experience, you have this expertise, whatever, but also acknowledge the things where we might, need some work. I also can't help but think the professional training path that we're in, and this is not unique to pharmacists, this would also be true of other, I'm thinking healthcare professionals, but probably even broader than that. It sets people up for this to be a problem. Like we are in a degree training. I mean, I remember being in pharmacy school, being in compounding lab, where points were taken off if there was a wrinkle in our, the sticker, the label that went on the bottle, right? It's drilled into us for good reasons, for patient safety reasons, that it has to be perfect. Well, that's true when we're talking about, I wouldn't say necessarily a sticker, but when we're talking about the right medication to the right patient, absolutely. Like we've got to be as close to perfect, if not perfect. But we take that approach and mindset and we live by that. And that sets up this environment where we don't understand that failure is a process of learning and growth, and that we can get comfortable. And in fact, it's a welcome thing, not in the context of patient care, but in terms of our broader professional development. Absolutely, failure is essential. And so I think that if we haven't, overachievers, high function, high performers, that things have to be perfect, gosh, we might end up, post academic career, and for the first time maybe in our lives, or one of the first times in our lives, we're really entering into some of this messy territory for the first time.
Yeah, in the coaching program that I'm doing right now, actually is so far been really focused on a series of, like, treating everything as a series of experiments. And like you said, Tim, we can't experiment with patient care, obviously, um, to an extent, unless you're doing clinical trials and, you're trying out new processes. But in safe places, i.e. your professional growth, your, financial learnings,
Yeah.
your, ability to, launch a business. I mean, all of these things are a series of experiments, and you are just trying things out, getting an effect or an outcome, getting feedback, and then incorporating that feedback. So you need that loop to close and say, okay, I tried this. This is what went well. This is what didn't go well. and now I'm going to try this thing again. But when you're in that new space of like, I've never done this before, of course, you're going to have more feelings come up for you of like, this is a little scary. I don't know what's going to happen. But if you are okay with the fact that there's going to be growth on the other side and you keep that growth mindset perspective, you can get that feedback and incorporate it and say, okay, what did I do this time? What was good? What was not good? And how can I keep growing and moving forward?
Yeah, I had a mentor, Mary Alice Bennett. Some may recognize that name, an icon in pharmacy, an incredible human being. Was really my first mentor in my residency training program. And I'll never forget, those moments that happen in your life where you're like, I'll never forget something. And she shared with me something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, like, Tim, if you always have to put a bow on something, like things aren't going to be moving along. Right. And what she was getting at, and she said it a different way once of like, sometimes 90% you got to ship it. You got to ship it. And that doesn't mean you do crappy work. That's not what she's saying. But sometimes that 90 to 100% where we live in that perfectionist mindset, right? We have to ask ourselves the question, what are we gaining from the last 10% that often takes the equivalent amount of time of the first 90%? And going back to what I just shared is often where I think we live. Part of perfectionism is living in a safe place, avoiding putting yourself out there and avoiding the feelings of failure. That's just true, right? So what is not getting done? What contributions are not happening? And what are the potential that could be there if we could learn to just ship it? And that's a razor's edge, right? Because we're not talking about doing shoddy work. That's not the point, at all. But that has always stuck with me. And I think for folks that are struggling with perfectionism, we're talking about imposter syndrome. It's the last time I'm going to say it on the show because I don't want to say it again, right? These things can contribute, I think, in a big way. And again, where a mentor and a coach, I think, could be really, really valuable to help put up a mirror and help us see these things.
Yeah, something that aligns with this topic, and I won't say that word again, but a certification that I've been working on for coaching is through an organization called Positive Intelligence. And in the positive psychology space, a lot of the narratives that we have ingrained in us actually really started in childhood. Like, regardless of what our childhood was like, if it was great, if it was okay, if it was challenging, by the age of 5, we really developed both our strengths and our weaknesses. And then as adults, we tend to overuse our strengths to our own detriment. And with that, it could show up as perfectionism. It could show up as people pleasing. It could show up as avoiding, difficult conversations. It could show up as always being tied to an outcome. Raise my hand for that one. But there's these 9 different profiles that folks can have to different extents. And it's been just such a fascinating journey, one for me to be on in my own growth, but then to have my clients work through, okay, what are the tendencies that you are overworking right now and they're harming you? And how do we really bring those back into your strengths so that you can not be so damaging to your own well-being, to your own performance, to your own relationships? And so sometimes these tendencies and negative narratives can actually be so harmful to so many areas of our life. But the great news is you can take back control. And the science behind this particular training is so research backed, which is why I love it as a nerdy, evidence-based pharmacist. There's a lot of functional MRI data behind it that has actually shown rewiring of folks' brains. So love it. If we want to talk more about that, we can, but I couldn't help but tie those two things together.
That's great. I want to shift gears and talk about mindset for a bit and how some people are able to really see past what is known and possible to varying degrees and really break through what Gay Hendricks talks about in his book, The Big Leap, the upper limit problem, where we tend to kind of butt up against what we perceive to be as possible. And we naturally, often subconsciously, come back down into this comfortable zone. And why this is so, I'm reading a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. For those that are watching YouTube, I'm holding it up right now. I'll link to it in the show notes. And here's what Dan Sullivan has to say about this concept. in the book referencing Michelangelo as an example of someone who at a very young age saw beyond his current abilities to imagine what possible. He says, quote, "Throughout his life, Michelangelo continued to take on projects far beyond, quote, impossibly beyond his skill level. Most people are afraid to commit fully to the 10X process because it inevitably requires letting go of your current identity, circumstances, and comfort zone." And then he goes on to say, "What got you here won't get you there." And so I'm curious, from your perspective, Jackie, in your experience coaching others in your own journey, um, as you said, these limitations we put upon ourselves often stem back from our upbringing, our childhood experiences, and that is the foundation for what we believe is possible. But as was just articulated, that doesn't have to be a fixed thing. And there is an opportunity for us to operate out of a different level of growth and mindset. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I love that reference. And now I need to read that book. So I'll add it to my book list. I first heard about Gay Hendricks' The Big Leap from Alex Barker. Shout out to Happy PharmD. And one of the transformational steps in my journey was connecting with Alex and learning more about coaching opportunities. And he took me under his wing and said, "Let me show you the way." Before that, one, I didn't know that coaching was like a thing that could be done. And you, Tim, connected me to Alex to say, "Hey, I just had a coach. You should really talk to him about the opportunity of, how did he learn about coaching?" And for me, I'm like, I don't even know what coaching is. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to run like a mini business. I don't know how to do any of that. And gosh, no one will ever invest in this sort of thing. It's just not possible. And so I think one of the turning points for me was realizing that we all continue to grow and develop and can go outside of our traditional professional identity. That was a really big, hard struggle for me, was to say, can I be a pharmacist and a coach? The answer was yes, but I didn't think that was possible. And then it was working through like, well, am I a pharmacist still? How does that
Are you a fake
like,
pharmacist?
we work, everyone who is a pharmacist works so hard to get there, and everybody's path was, very different along the way. But then getting to the upper limit problem of leaving your roots and, fear of disloyalty. Like, is my family going to be upset with me if I'm taking on this other identity? No one knows what it is. I mean, no one knows what pharmacists do at baseline, but let alone like coaching is like a whole other frontier. And you're like, how do you explain this to someone else? Like, think about like a coach in a sports team. Like, they are on the sideline. They are, not playing for the players, but they're giving strategies. They're giving feedback. They're holding people accountable. And so the parallels have been a little bit easier there. But I will say that, even now that I'm exploring like the next steps of the coaching business, like I'm learning about things and I'm like, is this even possible? Like, how does that even work? But I have examples like you and others to look to say, things are possible. You just haven't realized them yet. And what you're doing now is not going to be the same thing that you're going to need to evolve to. And so it's developing new skills. It's developing new mindsets of what is possible. It's, really changing that inner narrative of who you are right now and knowing that regardless of what age you are or place you are in your career, that you can choose to make those decisions to do things differently. If you don't even give yourself that room to dream or think about possibility, then you automatically shut it down and you automatically curb your growth potential. So I think having the space to dream and do that, but then I would always advocate to have someone in your corner holding you accountable to do the work, because it could be things that you're like, well, I wish I could do that, and put it on the back burner for 3 months, 6 months, 6 years, never. With that, I think there's so much that can be gleaned from those books and the concept of upper limit problem, along with now I need to read 10X is better than 2X. So thanks, Tim.
If I remember right, I think he talks about this in The Big Leap, and this speaks, in my opinion, to the value of a coach, value of community, value of other people that are, of a similar mindset and trying to grow in the same way and see what's possible. Not, by the way, out of an achievement focus, I'm going to sidetail here for a moment, but it's so important, right? That will end up where you don't want it to end up, right? But out of how are you able to really tap into that zone of genius, tap into your fullest contribution of service to others, which will naturally have an outgrowth, whether it be within an organization, within a business, et cetera, right? I think it's that contribution, that service of others through your full potential of what you have to offer. And that's such a fine line, as obviously achievement can come with its own perils that many people, already know of and are aware of. But when you're with a coach, when you're with the community, when you're with others, also true in the financial plan, you can start to really push this upper limit in an incremental way. And again, a lot of this is subconscious, which is so fascinating that we don't realize the ways that we often will kind of bring ourselves back into this comfortable zone. But if you try to do something, right? I just wrote an article yesterday about like why most people that are thinking about, building a business or doing something, and the advice that's out there of, hey, just jump in the deep end and figure it out. Like your body, if that's not who you are, nor if you're ready to do that, your body will scream, fight, kick. Like it's too much of a change. It's too much of a change, let alone is it a good business decision, right? And so we need to find these ways that we have an incremental growth. And, just like Darren Hardy talks about in the compound effect, we may not necessarily feel that growth in any given day, week, or month, but you look back 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, kind of trust the process, like compound interest with your financial plan. You're like, holy cow, how did that happen? Right? And that's the key is we want to understand and have a self-awareness. So what is our baseline? Where are we at now? Where are some of the limitations of that? Where are we getting stuck? And how can we inch forward, inch forward, inch forward? I want to briefly talk, Jackie, about burnout, which I think will be a nice segue as we wrap up and talk about what you're doing on a coaching perspective and where people can learn more. Burnout is another term we've thrown a lot in our profession, around in our profession, and really healthcare at large. And I think for good reason, right? You look back to the pandemic. I think this was a moment in time that a lot of people hit a wall. I think about our pharmacist colleagues in the community setting that were trying to deal with all the things on the front lines while also dealing with just the transition and change back home. I think about our pharmacist colleagues in the hospital health system settings that, might have been working in intensive care units, other floors, the burnout that happened. And heck, even those who aren't or weren't in frontline positions, just the chaos that happened from remote work environments. Those that had kids were trying to do school, and there's just a lot of things, going on in a short period of time. But I think why someone is burned out is a critical question to pave a new path forward. And I'm curious, I hear a lot about the financial piece being the grind, obviously in the work that we do, but what are you seeing as the main reasons, whether it's people that you're coaching in your circles, for why some people are reaching this wall, right? Reaching this burnout, resistance, whatever we want to call it. What are some of the main reasons? Is it financial? Is it misalignment with what they're doing and kind of what they feel is what's resonating internally? Is it something else? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's unique to each person, but I do see trends that we can align with what is known in this space. So emotional exhaustion, the ability to have enough energy to give at work, at home, outside of work, and really just folks stretched too thin. It could be the workload itself and that there's too much to do. It could be the nature of the work and that the emotional investment required to conduct the work is so high that there's never a time to recharge or reset or really even take care of oneself. It could be that lack of self-efficacy and really realizing someone's full potential and feeling kind of stagnant or stuck or at this boredom level of, okay, I don't really see what my next step is. I don't know what that looks like, but I know I want something different. I'm not sure what that is. And then it could be just outside pressures that are coming in from various sources in that regard. And that could be financial. It could be external, with society and all the things going on. It could be with societal pressure of comparison culture, and saying, oh, well, I don't have this. So am I really succeeding? So there's so many factors that can go into it. And it's one of the big reasons why I brought in a huge component to my coaching of mental fitness and through positive psychology. What can we do in our control to start to take back the inner shifts that we need immediately. And the science that I mentioned behind it shows that within 7 to 8 weeks of practicing this, regardless of what your career objectives are, this is the foundation that I always start with. Because if we can take control of what's in our purview and really change our mindset towards using our strengths and leveraging them to better our well-being, to better our personal, professional relationships, to better our performance, then yes, the external things can be addressed maybe, and we can learn some skills to advocate for ourselves to address those things. But there's some external factors that just aren't going away, and they're not controllable, and we really need to not detach or attach ourselves to trying to put more effort into impacting things that we maybe can't individually. So my goal is to help empower people to, one, take back their mindset in a productive way that helps protect them and serves their well-being, their life, both personally and professionally, and ultimately their performance at work, whether that's staying in their current role, exploring something else in pharmacy, starting their own business, whatever it is they want for them. They can't do that unless you have clarity. You can't
Mm,
do deep work. I don't know if you've read that book, Tim, Deep Work by Cal
mhm.
Newport. But you can't do the work required to dream and explore if you don't even have the mental space to do so. Like if you're constantly running on E and you're not able to take care of you, or you feel like you can't take care of your responsibilities, and how could you ever do this really fun, creative, like dream work that is going to be that thing that takes you to your next fulfilling step? So for me, it's just been such a game changer in my coaching experience, not only, again, personally when I went through the training, but also using it every day now. And the cool thing is once you're through the first 8 weeks, it's only about 5 minutes of practice a day. It's something that literally any of us could do, right when you wake up in the morning, and incorporate throughout your day in small breaks. But the impact, like one of my clients sent me a screenshot of her smartwatch the other day, and she had done a few mental fitness exercises, and she's like, I can't believe how much this impacts me on a moment to moment basis. I'm like, it's so great. You just get to stop and choose a reaction to a situation. There's so much more we could talk about there, but I think if you don't have that mental space to be able to make a change, then you could do coaching or mentoring work, but you're still going to be stuck in that mental space of just feeling that burnout and not having a path to clear.
When you say mental space to make change, it reminded me of, I had a coach once who brilliantly said, I forget exactly what the scenario was we were talking about, but his question to me was, are you running to something or are you running from something? And I think as we talk about career as one example, if we're on that mental space where we're on E, where often we'll actually make some of these big life decisions, that's not typically the place we want to be making them from, right? Because it's in those moments we're often running from something. And I think we tend to over glorify what we're potentially running to. And yet another place where community, a coach, someone could really help us get to the place to see that more objectively, or hey, how do we get in a better headspace, before we make some of these big decisions and evaluate these things further. Let's wrap up by talking about Jackie Boyle Coaching. On your website, it says we help ambitious women flourish. So tell us more about why that focus, why that niche, what problem you're trying to solve, and who you work with and what that service looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been growing and evolving, again, those experiments of growing your own thing. And so what I've been discovering is that the work that I've done with my coaching clients, regardless of who they are, what gender they are, has always been rewarding. I've always loved helping someone discover what's really meant for them, where they can leverage their strengths, what they ultimately want to do. But what I always gravitate towards, I guess, from a external factor perspective, is that I see trends in our profession in healthcare in STEM fields of women opting out of certain roles early in their careers because they don't see a path forward to achieving advancement without sacrificing something in their life, whether that's their well-being, their relationships. They don't see a path because there aren't enough role models in certain areas of organizations. there's a lot of great data from McKinsey and Company around these trends of women stepping out of the advancement pipeline early. And so in talking with decision-making women in our space, it's like, well, the only path I see forward is that I have to burn myself out. I have to, neglect other priorities in my life that I'm not willing to. And I'm like, I can't accept that this is okay. Like ultimately, I really want to impact that trend of women being able to choose whatever type of career they want, whether that is another role in the profession, outside of the profession, whether it is in an administrative capacity, because we do need representation of all people so that there's great decisions being made at all levels of the organization. Whether that is, you want to start your own company, but you don't even feel like that's remotely possible. You can, but you have to have the right support around you. You have to have the right mental state to be in. You have to have that capacity to kind of grow and learn. And so my goal has been honing in on, like, how do I help serve women at a higher level so that we elevate everyone together? And so I do have one-on-one options primarily available. I am launching like a small beta group coming in July. And then I do some business coaching through a few contracted companies as well. And so a few different ways that you can work with us. If you want to find out more, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you can certainly drop me a message there, and happy to discuss even just what your situation is. If my coaching is a good fit, awesome. If not, I'm happy to refer you to other coaches in my community, because there are certainly a lot of great folks out there. So thanks for allowing me to share.
Great stuff, Jackie. We'll link to both those in the show notes, the LinkedIn profiles, as well as your website. Really enjoyed the conversation. And as we're wrapping up here, dawned on me, of course, as I mentioned earlier in the show, this is a financial podcast, and people might be thinking, Tim, what's the financial connection? I would argue there is a really strong one. When you look at these topics, whether we are talking about the word not to be named, or we are talking about burnout or achieving our full potential or mindset or growth, I can assure you those are very related to not only the quality of what we're doing and the interactions and the relationships that we have, but also the compensation and the value that is driven from that. And so when we talk about things like salary negotiation and advocating for yourself, these are the undercurrents, right? These are the things that are often behind that would allow us to be successful in that. And again, as I said briefly before, when we are providing value and focused on providing value and doing that from the areas that are our greatest strengths, things will start to happen, things will start to move, whether that's recognized internally within your organization. And sometimes it's not, and that's outside of your control. And there's obviously different conversations to be had there. So Jackie, great stuff. Thanks so much for taking time to come on the show. And I'm sure we'll have you back again in the future.
Thanks, Tim. This was so fun.